Thank you. Right, I'm just going to share my screen. You'll just have to bear with me. I'm not the greatest at tech, but here we go. Is that coming up?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Right, so I'll just give yourself a little bit of an introduction. So I'm Annie, I'm a speech and language therapist and I specialise in neurorehabilitation. I work with patients who've had traumatic brain injuries and I work for a specialised neuro hospital called the Walton Centre in Liverpool. So I'm going to try and give you a whistle-stop tour of what speech therapy is in about 10 minutes, which is kind of quite hard because it's quite vast. So speech therapy provides treatment and support for care and children, for adults and children who have difficulties with communication or with eating, drinking and swallowing. I just wanted to see if you can use your chat feature. Can you just give me a thumbs up if you've heard of a speech and language therapist or know what they do? I don't know if I can see the chat right there. Does anyone know how I get the chat up?
I'm not sure if you can see it
here.
I know I normally struggle.
Yeah.
I can.
I've just found.
Oh, you got it now. Perfect. Yeah. We have just had a session with another speech and language therapist, but it was slightly different area that she was working in. So I think we should all have a good idea roughly of the role.
Of what? Okay, perfect. That's great. Fab. Oh, now I can't go back on it right there. Sorry. Perfect. Yeah. So as I think, did you meet Lucy? Was it before? So you've spoken with a speech therapist before. That's great. Okay. So did you know that Adele had damaged vocal cords? Ed Sheeran and Emily Blunt learned to manage their stammers, and I think most of you all know from Britain's Got Talent, the recent winner actually used AAC, which speech therapists use quite a lot with their patients. So what do we do? So I'll focus on what kind of like my job role is with the acquired traumatic brain injury patients. So on a daily basis, I see patients with both communication difficulties and swallowing difficulties. We look towards patients that have had brain injuries that are stopping them being able to communicate, and we look at other ways that we can help them communicate. So we try and basically we'll teach them how to talk again. We'll teach them other ways of communication. So whether that's using, like the winner of the Britain's Got Talent, using actually a device that talks for them. And we also look at their understanding and stuff. So we'll work with the wider multidisciplinary team and we look at whether they're having difficulties with other stuff and whether that's impacting on their daily lives. So we work closely with the doctors, nurses, occupational therapists, physiotherapists, and we're all one big team. So it's a lot of the patients that come here are quite complex patients, so they need an input from a lot of the team together. So we have patients that come in that have brain cancer, that have stammers from their traumatic brain injury, learning difficulties, dementia, quite a lot. So what do we do? So we work closely with patients, carers and other professionals. So in the children's sector, we work with teachers and teaching assistants. And then when you get into the adult sector, we work with nurses, occupational therapists, doctors, physios. So there's around 15,000 speech therapists based in the UK, and they change in sessions. So they can be in hospitals, healthcare centres, schools, all kinds of different. In research, there's a lot of speech therapists that are specialised in research. A lot of lecturers that I actually, when I was in uni, a lot of lecturers, they do part-time lecturing and research and part-time actual clinical-based speech therapy jobs. Another setting that speech therapists will work in is prisons and courtrooms. We work with young offenders to help them if they've got communication difficulties, because you can can find out that when they're actually in a youth offending setting, that they need a speech therapist to come in and help them with their court cases and stuff like that. What we don't do, and what we get told a lot of the time, and what I say when I'm a speech therapist, people think we're elocution teachers, and I'm not being funny. If you're from Liverpool, you're not going to be an elocution man or speech therapist. So we're definitely not elocution teachers. We're not voice coaches either. We're also not teachers. We're not English teachers, which a lot of people kind of get us mixed up with, and we're not nurses. So, like I've said, this is just a list of things of whereabouts we can work. So lots of them I think I've already covered. A lot of speech therapists in adult settings work in community. So they'd be like community nurses. So they go out and they, before pandemic, would go into people's houses and actually deliver speech therapy from people's houses. As an acute setting, so as an inpatient setting, I work on a ward. So I have long stay rehab patients with me that can stay here from up to about 2 years. They can actually be in the inpatient setting. So I'll just give you an example. So one of my patients who came in, suffered a traumatic brain injury, was able to walk, talk, basically had gone back to basis, and he left 2 weeks ago talking and walking. So that was after a long stay of intensive rehab with a speech therapist, so teaching him how to communicate in ways that wasn't talking at the start, because that wasn't the correct format, and it was then using different things, so using what we call communication aids, so using sheets of paper, using alphabet charts to choose things like that. So I think as our role is to be able to rebuild people's life back to the way they were in an adult setting. In a paediatric setting, it's about developing those things, so developing that knowledge and that understanding, and for little ones to be able to then go on and develop into talking adults. Yeah, like the other professionals that we work alongside. So I don't know if you can see, so we look a little bit, without my jumper, we look a little bit like a nurse. So we wear a tunic. I think we normally wear a yellow trim. So we work alongside nursing staff a lot of the time when we will work towards people's swallow, as many of our patients have swallowing difficulties. I don't know if Lucy's mentioned the swallowing difficulties, but that's a massive part of somebody's life, to be able to eat and drink safely. So a lot of the time when we have patients that come to us, we work towards rebuilding their swallow due to their brain injury. They are no longer to manage food and drink safely. So we work towards rebuilding those muscles, helping them do a lot of intensive therapy to then be able to eat and drink again. So that's like the two main roles of a speech therapist. So we work towards communication, and we also work towards swallow, which I think a lot of the time people don't know about the swallow. I know myself, before I went into this, I didn't know anything to do with the swallow. I wouldn't assume that a speech therapist would deal with somebody's swallow. But that is one of so it's 75% of our caseload in our setting at the moment is to do with what we call dysphagic patients, who can't swallow safely. So why did I choose to do speech and language therapy? I chose to do speech and language therapy because I wanted to be a paediatric speech and language therapist. I love kids. I love the idea of developing someone's knowledge and giving somebody a voice. I then went to university and completely changed my mind. It's a course where you can go on thinking you want to do adults or you want to do paediatrics, and the joy of being a speech therapist is it's so broad. It's not just one day you're going to go into paediatrics. You can go from paediatrics to adults. You can change. You do the 3-year course, and at the end of it, you don't really need to know what you want to specialise in. It's not a direct, so you don't go like into children's and adult nursing. You will go into speech therapy and then at the end decide what jobs you want to apply for. So you can, like I said, with the paediatrics, you can go and work. You can still work in a hospital with paediatrics with kids. You can work in a school. You can work in a health centre. So with adults, you can do the same. You can work in the hospital in an acute setting, community settings. There's loads of different job roles out in the speech and language therapy community. So I wanted to do paediatrics and then completely changed it and saw different things on placement. I went to the University of Manchester Metropolitan. I graduated last year, so I was a COVID graduate. Absolutely loved it, great teaching and loved the course. There was a lot of placement involved, so you get from your first year, you're involved in going into schools, so it's a mixture of paediatrics and adult placement. You can kind of choose what you would prefer and speak to the university and say, you know, I really want to do paediatrics. I'd love my placements to mainly be in paediatrics, but I would say go for them all, because like me, I completely changed my mind. My first job is here, so I'm a newly qualified speech therapist, so I started here in September. So I graduated in July and got this job, and then started here in September. The reason I wanted to work here is because it is so specialist, and I knew that by third year I really wanted to specialise in traumatic brain injury. It's something I kind of, when I was in uni, in sixth form, kind of knew I wanted to do something medical, kind of knew I wanted to work in a healthcare setting, like giving back to people, but hadn't really heard of this. And it was only that it was my friend who was on the course that told me about it, and she was further on and she was on placement here. And it just really, the kind of thing she was coming home and telling me and saying, you know, it's like you're doing medicine, it's like you're doing a bit of care, and it's really interesting. So that's why I kind of went in that way. But I know my school never, it was never on the careers talk. I don't think I ever heard of what a speech therapist was until I was in year 13 and decided to actually go through clearing, because I wanted to do something completely different before that. My future goals would be to become, so you can go up in banding. So I'd like to work my way up in banding, being a speech therapist and becoming more knowledgeable. So I'm actually at the moment doing a master's module in complex rehab to kind of, and that's the Walton Centre where I work is funding that. So they're funding me as a speech therapist working full time to do a master's module at the moment, and to develop my knowledge and my expertise to then be able to give the patients my knowledge into clinical knowledge. Let me just say, so how do I get qualified to be a speech therapist? So you need a degree to become a speech therapist, and there's 18 universities across the UK that offer speech and language therapy degrees. It's not that many compared to other courses. I lived in Liverpool and went to Manchester University. Liverpool didn't offer speech and language therapy, so it was kind of the way up of finding a uni close to home that I did, because I didn't want to move away. But I know a lot of the courses are being added. I think every year they're adding to different universities. You need 3 A levels or the equivalent. I did have a look at what the entry requirements are, because I know that's something I really wanted to know when I was in sixth form. So 3 A levels, most unis want AAB, including biology, chemistry, physics, maths, or psychology or applied science. However, Manchester Metropolitan have started a foundation degree that they started last year. So I think, and then they also.
Oh, I think we've lost Annie there. She must have gone on to the next session. I hope you all found that really useful. If you did have any questions for Annie at all, please do put them in the chat and we can follow up with her later on, because I know that kind of got cut off before it got to the end. But I think there's loads of information in there. I know I found that really useful, so hopefully you did as well. But do let us know if there's anything that you wanted to ask you didn't get a chance to.
I think one of the main benefits of that was to see 2 speech and language therapists, one after the other, to see how different their roles are. and that's dictated by the NHS trust that they work for. So Annie's from the Walton Centre, who have a high focus on neurological issues, so that heavily dictates the role she's doing. And then we saw Jordan earlier, who's in a different trust, and that makes her role vastly different. So not only are you thinking about certain roles to go into, but the trust you get your job in will very much dictate what your day-to-day working life will be like, and the roles you cover.
Absolutely, definitely. Thanks for that overview. Right, I think we've got Oliver now. Hi, Oliver.
Hi, guys.
I'll pass over to you because I know you'll probably have lots to cover. So I'll let you crack on. I'll keep an eye on the chat and ask any questions that come up.
Okay, then, great stuff. Hi, everyone. So my name is Oliver Tierney, and I am an operating department practitioner. Now, it's very likely you have no idea what that role entails, so let me talk you through it. The reason for this is we're generally working in the operating theatre, so we don't get a huge amount of advertising about our role. So our role consists of 3 areas generally: the traditional scrub role that you'll have seen on television, the management of the instruments, the assisting of the surgeon during surgery. We also work in the anaesthetic role, so we'll be assisting the anaesthetist, that's the doctor that puts you to sleep, and making sure you're breathing and alive throughout the procedure. And equally, we work in the recovery department, which is kind of like a ward we send our patients to for a couple of hours post-surgery to check everything's gone okay. So the role itself is incredibly varied. ODPs nowadays can be found on intensive care units. We have strong links to the resuscitation teams, the transfer teams, and you're finding more and more of us now in management positions and in teaching positions. So my current role is clinical lead for education and development. So I work a lot with the staff, developing their roles, working out individual training plans for the individuals, and looking into extended roles. I think one of the really exciting things about the operating theatre these days is more and more staff are being asked to move into roles that were traditionally junior doctor roles. So we have a lot of further education via university that allows staff to move into these junior doctors roles, which is really exciting for all the staff. On top of that, I work with students. That was always my passion. My passion has always been education. So I have 5 students at any one time that was trained with us for 3 years. I manage the medical students rotation when they come into theatre, the nursing rotation when they come into theatre. And I've been lucky enough to branch out from the operating theatres. I did numerous qualifications in simulation training, so I'm now one of the simulation leads for the trust. I'm a mediator, a coach, and also I teach human factors at a national level. So to start within the operating theatres is where I began, but my career has gone from strength to strength since then. And that's the point about moving into the NHS. And I really want to highlight this. Coming into the NHS does not mean you're always going to be a nurse, does not mean you're always going to be an ODP. If you find yourself a niche and you apply yourself correctly, you can end up in roles you didn't even dream of, okay? You can become basically a junior doctor if you really apply and go through the master's level route, etc. There's a question here I've been asked, which is, what would you advise yourself? This came on this little sheet you sent me, so thanks for that. I think one of the things you've got to remember when you're training in an operating theatre is that you're working alongside the consultants all the time. And sometimes in an operating theatre, things can get a bit tense. They can get a bit stressed because at the end of the day, we've got someone's life in front of us. And sometimes voices can be raised, words can be said. When you first start, you can take these things to heart, but you soon realize that this is all about keeping the patient safe. And this is not about anything personally to do with you, but it's just a highly stressful situation. So that's the advice I give myself. I started my training again. Don't take everything to heart. It's not about you. And that's probably it for me, really. I hope I've explained the role well enough for you. And I hope there's some questions for me to answer. Cheers, guys.
Thank you so much for that overview. It was excellent. Really interesting to
you.
hear about what you do. Hopefully we'll get a couple of questions in the chat to ask you. I just thought I would start, if that's okay, by asking how you heard about this career in the first place and what made you choose it.
Funny story, actually. So I originally was going to do English literature and politics. That was my plan. And I took a gap year. And at this time I was working on a go-kart track and singing in a covers band. And my mother was a theatre matron. And she said, there's no chance that you are going to spend the next year working on a go-kart track. I've got you a job in the operating theatres. So she ruined all my dreams of stardom. But it was from being a healthcare assistant within the operating theatres that I actually saw the ODP role and fell in love with the ODP role, basically. So it's all my mother's fault, to be quite honest.
That was not the answer I was expecting, but you've got to expect the unexpected in these situations, I think. Thank you for sharing that with us. It's really interesting.
That's no problem.
How you heard about it. We have got a question come through. So did you have to do a degree to get into this role?
When I started, it was diploma level training. Nowadays, yes, it's gone to degree level, but equally we have an apprenticeship route as well. Okay. Whilst degrees are all well and good, not everyone gets the grades to get onto a degree course. And I've always thought that's a shame, because this is a very practical and vocational job. So the apprenticeship route is also a completely viable route. You come out with the same qualifications, you're paid exactly the same when you qualify, but it just means if you haven't got those grades to get on a degree, there's other options to bring you into the NHS, and that's across the board in the NHS as well.
That's really good to know, thank you. And we've got another question. What do you love about your job?
It's working with the students. I really enjoy education, have always enjoyed education, and I'm very blessed to be in this role, to now be a teacher and an educator. There's nothing better than taking a student through 3 years worth of training and then for them to give them a job at the end of it, and for them to want to stay in the trust they've been trained in. I always think you're doing something wrong if you train these students up and then they leave straight away to go elsewhere. Okay, so no, I love it. But what I love about my job, working with the students, getting them to the end of their training, and then seeing them as junior and senior staff in a few years' time.
That's excellent. Thank you for sharing that.
No problem.
I was just wondering what kind of skills you need to be an ODP, because it sounds like it's quite a high stress environment being in like the surgery aspect of the NHS.
Yeah, it can be stressful. We don't like it to be stressful. It's not like ER or anything like that. You know, we haven't got people going into cardiac arrest every single day. You know, we'd be doing something wrong if that was the point. We like it to be simple. We like it to be standard. But yeah, there are quite a few of quite intensive skill sets you do have to develop that you can't really prepare yourself for, because there's nothing, you know, for example, if you go into nursing and you go onto your first ward placement, you know how to make a bed, you know how to potentially feed or help someone get dressed, etc. There's nothing that prepares you for working in an operating theatre. So when you first come to an operating theatre, it can be a bit intense, because you're kind of like a rabbit in a headlight, because you're learning all these new skills, all working with all these different machines, etc. So yeah, it is intensive at first, but as you get through your training, if you're being trained correctly, you get into a groove, and before you know it, you're doing the job naturally. So yes, there's a lot to learn initially. The first year and a half is very intensive, but then usually after that, you're flying, and it's like second nature to you.
Excellent, thank you. That's really useful to know a little bit more about the kind of skills you need, because like you said, it's not something you can prepare for as such. Or
there's nothing that prepares you.
So you mentioned like how you got into this career and a bit of the work experience you did beforehand. Is there any work experience you'd recommend for anyone interested in this career?
So we can arrange work experience, definitely, but you have to be 18 plus to come into an operating theatre. And to do that, all you need to do is contact someone like myself, contact one of the educational leads for theatre, and we can arrange a placement for you. But like I say, it has to be 18 plus, and you'd only be in an observational role. But yeah, it can happen, and it does happen a lot.
Amazing, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. I think it's been really beneficial to hear from you and promoting this role, which I think a lot of people haven't heard of before. So it's fantastic to have you here representing that.
No problem at all.
I hope you all
enjoyed
it. Fantastic. I hope you all enjoyed this. I think we're going to disappear off into different rooms again shortly. But again, we might have one more speaker actually. But again, if you have any questions, please do pop them in the chat, because we can address them later on. Or if you've got anything to reflect about, potentially if you've not heard about ODP before and you wanted to tell us what you enjoyed about that chat, or if you're going to research it in the future, that would be great to hear as well. Nice to hear what people are thinking after events like this.
Just as a reminder, while we're waiting for our next speaker, as Leon has been putting in the chat, we have follow-up webinar series on the 18th of March. So you go away, digest anything you've learned from today, and come back with your parents, and you can ask them more questions about AHP careers.
Hi, Laura.
Hello.
Nice to meet you. I'll hand over to you because I know we've not got too much time with you, but I'll keep an eye on the chat and ask you any questions that come up if that's okay.
Okay, yes, great. So my name's Laura. I'm an art therapist, and I thought I'd just sort of briefly outline what art therapy is, and then sort of tell you a bit about my route into art therapy, because it can be quite unique, sort of different life experiences and career paths into art therapy. So I thought that'd be useful to share. So art therapy is a form of psychotherapy. So I'm a therapist and I work with clients, but whereas in sort of a talk-in therapy, there'd be the therapist and the client in the room, there's also the added element of the clients making artwork, and that's sort of a form of communication. So where there might not be the words to describe an experience or a feeling, artwork can sort of provide a metaphor, or it can provide sort of a way of just getting those feelings out onto paper so that you can kind of look together and sort of work out what's going on there. So that can be really useful with clients, a really wide range of clients. So sometimes with learning disabilities, perhaps, or dementia, or I work with clients who've experienced emotional trauma, some sort of trauma in their lives that there aren't necessarily the words to sort of describe. Making images using the art materials can really help to work towards being able to verbalize some of these things. Art therapy itself, it's a regulated profession, so we're registered with the HCPC and the Health and Care Professions Council. And our professional body is BAT, the British Association of Art Therapists. So you can Google them if you want to find out more. And to be an art therapist, you need to have a master's degree in art therapy or art psychotherapy. You can use those terms interchangeably. And again, on the BAT website, they have sort of a list of education providers who run those courses. And I'm currently a lecturer on the one in Chester. So originally, when I left school, I thought I wanted to be an architect. So I went to the Glasgow School of Art, and sort of when I was there, I realized I loved being creative. I loved being with people, but being an architect wasn't necessarily what I wanted. So I went to do an apprenticeship in outdoor education to sort of be with people. I worked with school children, I worked with vulnerable groups, some Prince's Trust groups as well. And as part of that, I loved the outdoor stuff, but sort of once a week we'd sit in an art room, and the groups would kind of make artwork about some of the experiences that they'd had during the week, and things like if they'd done something that they found really scary, they'd sort of make an image about it and then share their artwork, and that would sort of give them a way of really connecting with each other about some of the things that they'd been through that week, some of the adventures they'd had. And I found that so fascinating. And I Googled art and psychology and found art therapy. So that kind of prompted me to go back to university and get a degree in fine art, which I loved, and gave me the opportunity to really understand visual language, understand processes around art making, using art materials. And then after that, went back into work and worked with the NHS as an arts coordinator. I volunteered in sort of adult mental health hospitals to sort of be, assist in different sort of therapeutic art making workshops and things like that. And then I sort of worked in the arts sector as well with young people, and it all really helped me gain experience of being with people in like a creative capacity. And then sort of I went on from there to do an MA in art therapy. And just before that, I did an art therapy foundation course, which BAT offers. It's like 5 days to really give you a whistle-stop tour of different ways of using art therapy and doing some experiential art making, which is really fascinating. Once I did my MA, I registered, and now I'm working with adolescent clients in schools who have been adopted. So they've got, they've had some traumatic experiences that they need to sort of process in the art therapy. So I sort of work with a particular child in a particular school and then go to a different school. So it's lots of sort of traveling around and working with social workers and families and the organisation that I'm connected with to really support them. And I also engage in sort of CPD, which is continued professional development workshops, which is an expectation once you're qualified that you'll always keep learning, always keep developing and coming across new ways to practice, which I really love about art therapy. Like every day is different and your clients always bring you something new. So it's just that kind of lifelong learning that you're sort of engaged in. So yeah, and the one sort of piece of advice that I would offer is that it's okay to explore if you try something because it felt right and actually it's not the thing for you, that's okay. It's going to teach you loads of stuff and then you can kind of take that and move on and sort of try different things. And you'll get where you're going eventually and it'll all make sense. Does anyone have any questions about art therapy?
Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. It's so interesting to hear about that role and how you're practicing working with young people, but also going into the lecturing side of things as well and sharing your experiences. I think that's really interesting to see that mix of both sides that you're managing to merge together in your career at the moment. It's fantastic.
Oh, thank you. I'm
just wondering, while we wait for a couple of questions to come in, oh, we've got one now actually. Do you have to be amazing at art in order to do this kind of career?
That is such a good question. And we get asked that by clients as well. I actually think in some ways being amazing at art is a bit of a barrier because what art therapy is about the process of using art materials, and it's your relationship with what you've made. And you could make anything. You could squidge up some Play-Doh and make some shapes with it, or some people tear up paper and things like that, and it's all about that sensory experience of using the art materials and sort of the way of understanding your relationship with what it is that you've made. So no, you don't.
That's good to know. We've had another question come in. What is the most rewarding part of your job?
I really love being able to provide a safe space where my clients can come and share things that they might not have felt able to share before, or to sit alongside them while they kind of make images and they make their artwork, and then we kind of sit together and talk about kind of what that might be about, and just kind of figuring out new ways of understanding their emotions, or kind of how to regulate their emotions is really rewarding.
That's the thing that really stood out for me when you was talking. It sounds like something that's really rewarding to do. That's excellent to hear. Okay, so we've had another question come in that's kind of double-barreled. So do you deal with extremely traumatized people, and does this usually help them to overcome their issues?
My clients have had traumatic experiences kind of in their early lives, and by making images, it can sort of move from that really difficult kind of non-verbal sort of trauma to starting to look together and sort of process some of the feelings that are coming up for them, and that can help us move towards a place where they can verbalize and where they can start to tell people what they need and sort of manage their emotions, sort of regulate their emotions, we'd say. So yeah, it can be really useful in that way.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. It's been very useful to hear everything that you do and the diverse groups you work with as well. I think it's fascinating to know this kind of is a broad spectrum, from children to people with mental health conditions to older people as well. So it's really interesting to hear how you work across that spectrum. And I hope everyone's found it beneficial today. So thank you very much. Laura was our last speaker, so we'll be heading back for a Q&A session in a moment. So we'll all disappear back into the Zoom void again shortly. But yeah, if you have any more questions, do try and put them into the Q&A, so hopefully you get them answered by the end of today. Thank you all.